Part 77. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 761. Chapter 761 Phoenix Broken Wings. The auctioneer looked down at the number, No 33 Phoenix. Phoenix is the code name Xiaoling gave herself when she entered paradise. Xiao Shaowai knew that she was the phoenix of the Xia family, and this codename made it easier for him to identify herself. The auctioneer shouted loudly, "Then, please invite Ms. Phoenix to come up to the stage and take back her lot." Xiaoling put on her mask more tightly, wore a black gauze, and walked onto the stage on stiletto heels studded with sparkling diamonds. The lights on the stage were dazzling. The little girl was huddled in the cage in the center, her hands and feet were shackled, looking at her wearing a mask, her eyes full of fear. Staff in clown costumes brought a beautiful tray. In the tray, there is a gorgeous key. Having seen the process of leading people off the stage several times, she knew that the key was used to open the cage door. As long as she opened the cage door, she could lead the little girl inside off the stage. Those dark eyes full of fear looked at her from across the cage. In a daze, she remembered her tragic experience in her previous life, and it was not like she had never been locked up in a cage by Peizian. That experience was too painful to look back on, and it suddenly came like a tide, making her unable to breathe. "What's wrong?" Someone hugged her body from behind, with a voice as smooth as a snake. Xiaoling was startled and turned around, only to see a tall and thin man appear behind her. He was wearing a gold and silver cobra mask on his face. The two fangs on the mask seemed to be grinning. "Who are you? Let me go," she struggled. However, the man's grasping technique was very professional. He easily restrained her hands and feet, forcing her body to lean back and fall into his arms in an extremely ambiguous posture. "My little girl." The man's pale, slender fingers touched her gorgeous and delicate mask with fiery warmth, his movements gentle, like a lover's teasing. Xiaoling was so frightened that she froze because she recognized his voice. "This man is Mr. Li. You can't do this." The auctioneer was sweating a little on his forehead. He couldn't understand how he provoked this perverted ancestor. However, since he was responsible, he could only persuade him, "This lady is our most important person. Guests of the paradise are not slaves. Have you forgotten the guest rules? You are not allowed to attack other guests." Long-winded Li Feng's voice was still as smooth as a snake. He ignored the auctioneer and continued to caress Xiaoling's mask with his fingers. Then he slowly moved down along the edge of the mask and paused. Xiaoling's eyes were unblinking, and even her breathing was stagnant. As if sensing her nervousness, Li Feng laughed softly, "My little girl." He said slowly, "Let me see who you are." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly took off Xiaoling's mask with one hand. The whole audience exclaimed. "This kind of behavior is quite impolite." "No, it's not just impolite, this kind of behavior can make people enmity. You must know that the guests of paradise wear masks to hide their identities. If someone reveals their identity, what kind of hatred will it be? Not to mention, those who can afford the membership fee and get on this ship are either rich or noble. How terrible would it be to attract their revenge?" However, this rule does not apply to Li Feng. Polite. These two words do not exist here at all. Retaliation. Only he takes revenge on others, who dares to take revenge on him. So, Li Feng opened Xiaoling's mask very arrogantly and wantonly. The mask decorated with exquisite gems and feathers slowly fell down, revealing a face with delicate features under the mask. It was a face belonging to a young girl, with fair skin and lips as light as cherry blossoms. It's not that amazing. However, it is so beautiful that people cannot take their eyes away. "Yexing Ling," someone called out. She is already a diva, and her celebrity face is so easy to recognize that her identity is exposed within a few seconds after the cover is removed. The crowd became commotion. They didn't expect that Yexin Ling, who they usually see on the screen, has such a clean and beautiful temperament. Could she be a member of this kind of dark game? Now it's interesting. It was Li Feng, stroking her cheek with one hand and murmuring, "It is indeed you. So, my good brother is also around here, right?" Xiaoling suddenly realized who he was targeting. "Li Lei is not here," she said in vain. "Shh. Li Feng put his finger on her lips, "A girl who lies is not a good girl." He dragged her to the microphone that was standing on the floor, and his snake-like greasy and demonic voice spread throughout the audience, "I want this nun. Auctioneer, bring me a slave collar." The whole audience was stunned. In the audience, Hong Ying stammered and pulled his companion, "Oh my God, has Li Feng finally gone completely crazy? That woman, that phoenix. Yeah, Yexin Ling. She is an is the master, not the slave." Hong Ying's companions also went crazy. Young Master Li's taste is getting weirder and weirder. On the stage, the auctioneer kept wiping his sweat and smiled dryly, "Li. Mr. Li, please stop joking. There is no reason to treat a guest with S status as a nuisance." "That's the truth here." Li Feng laughed ominously, and casually pulled out a tie on Xiaoling's corset leather jacket, making a clatter. The leather coat on her body caused a chain reaction, and a lot of it fell off in an instant. Originally, she was wrapped tightly and looked embarrassed. Half of her shiny white shoulders were exposed, and the looming wing bones on the shoulder blades looked strangely beautiful among the fragments of the leather clothes. She struggled instinctively. Li Feng kicked her and knocked her to the ground. Xiaoling felt dizzy, her ears were buzzing, her chest hurt, and she didn't know if her ribs were broken. She wanted to get up, but the dangerous man was already one step ahead of her, dragging her up by her messy long hair, and tied her hands and feet with the rope he pulled out in a few moments. Okay, Li Feng let go of her hand with satisfaction and watched her lose her balance and fall to the ground. Her forehead hit the hard teak floor and blood oozed out. "It's so fragile, it's not fun at all." A strange smile spread on his face, and he kicked her who was dying. "So, is there anyone who can exchange? If you can come up with a slave that satisfies me, I can give this to you." "Give him the little girl who will break when touched. Sweet, full of devilish temptation." "Mr. Li, Mr. Li, you really can't do this." The auctioneer couldn't think of anything and kept repeating the sentence, but like other staff, he didn't dare to step forward to stop him. If it were any other guest who violated the rules, he would have been expelled from paradise long ago, but Li Feng was different. Whoever was full could not think of offending this pervert among perverts. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 762. Chapter 762 Confrontation on the Stage. Li Feng's narrow eyes flashed with a snake-like luster. He seemed a little bored and stretched out a foot to step on Xiaoling's body. There was a clear sound of ribs breaking and she coughed out a mouthful of blood. Li Feng found it very interesting and crushed it hard again. Xiaoling's eyes turned black from pain and she felt like she was going to die. Li Feng's voice sounded softly, "What a pity, no one has exchanged it. It seems that you are really not very popular. Why don't we play a little game?" As he said that, he took a stick from the stage scenery. The bone whip with barbs was swung in the air a few times. The sound of the bone whip breaking through the air was sharp and whistling. Xiaoling regained her consciousness and heard Li Feng say, "This whip is too crudely made. If it hits a person a few times, he will die, but it will be okay." He waved a few more times unsatisfactorily and pointed at Xiaoling. "Since no one will exchange you," he smiled, his gorgeous eyes filled with bloodthirsty and excitement, "then let your life perish on the stage. Raise the whip high, and then bring it down." "Stop!" Suddenly, a voice came, cold and firm. The smile on Li Feng's lips widened, he turned around and looked accurately somewhere under the stage. All the guests followed his gaze. Under the dim light, a man was seen standing at the entrance of the auction house, wearing a black leather suit, walking towards the stage step by step. His face was hidden under a black mask, and his expression could not be seen, but his tense jaw showed his anger at this time, like an enraged beast, ready to approach his enemy. An atmosphere of excitement and uneasiness spread in the auction room. Who is he? He doesn't want to challenge Li Feng, does he? Someone whispered. I don't know, are you new here? Only newcomers are ignorant and fearless, and dare to fight against perverts like Li Feng, another person said. People around him nodded. Hong Ying looked at Li Lei carefully for a long time, and suddenly, he patted his companion hard. That man, isn't he Phoenix? Oh no, the slave Yexin Ling is carrying with him. He almost didn't recognize him after he changed his attire. His companions also reacted, it's really him. It turns out that he risked his life to save his master and couldn't get through Li Feng. Going against Li Feng means risking one's life. A group of people share a common feeling. What a true love, they sighed. Hong Ying, on the other hand, knows the entertainment industry quite well. Suddenly, he thought of something and became excited. Do you still remember that the slave brought by Yexin Ling is Li Feng's favorite type? Remember, what happened? The companions expressed confusion. Are you so excited? Hong Ying became even more excited. Do you remember that there are rumors that Li Feng's favorite type is his younger brother Li Lei? And Yexin Ling, Ling's recent scandal with Li Lei has been widely circulated. Oh my god, you mean, someone reacted and his eyes widened in disbelief. That man, is Li Lei. Hong Ying and a group of companions looked at each other. They were all frightened by their own speculations, and soon became excited again. If it is really Li Lei, it is definitely a rare show in a century. The elder brother who has been controlling his younger brother for many years meets his younger brother on such an occasion, and the younger brother goes to great lengths to save his girlfriend. Just thinking about it makes people tremble with excitement. Obviously, many people have guessed this conjecture. The scene became quiet, and everyone's eyes followed the pair of brothers. You could hear the needle drop in the scene. Xiaoling, who fell on the stage, also looked at Li Lei walking towards her. She had a broken rib, and the bone spurs pierced her lungs, making it difficult for her to even breathe and speak. She wanted to tell Li Lei to go away and avoid this pervert, but she opened her mouth but no sound came out. From the corners of his lips, he coughed out blood foam again. Li Lei walked onto the stage and looked at Li Feng. Let her go, the person you are looking for is me. Raised his hand and took off the mask. Everyone gasped, it was indeed Li Lei. On the stage, the man's face and body were as handsome as the world's top supermodel, seemingly standing casually. From the bridge of his nose to his shoulders, back, waist, hips, and legs, every line was so perfect that people couldn't take their eyes away. He is like a natural luminous body that makes people follow and become obsessed with him. No wonder Li Feng is so obsessed with him. Red Eagle made a sigh-like sound, it's really. He paused for several seconds before saying in a dreamy tone, God's work of art. Everyone around him also sighed, such a man is really the most exquisite work of God. Li Feng looked at his younger brother, his pupils narrowed slightly, and he licked his red lips. You want to replace her? With yourself? Do you want to be my slave? Okay, Li Lei said without hesitation. This sentence was like a stone thrown into the silent lake, and the whole place exploded with a buzz. He is crazy, someone said. Does he know what will happen to slaves who fall into Li Feng's hands? They are brothers, what doesn't Li Lei know? Someone else said, but, Li Lei also risked his life and dignity for Yexin Ling. Many people nodded. Although Li Lei appears as a slave, he surrenders to his beloved woman, which can only be regarded as fun. However, being forced to submit to a man is different, it is a great shame. Second young Master Li, Someone sighed, I didn't expect that the Li family would have such a cruel and ruthless eldest young man, and also such an infatuated and unrepentant second young master. A sigh of relief. On the stage, Xiaoling huddled up with a cough, and finally uttered a voice with difficulty, Li Lei, don't, you, go. She wanted to ask him to take Xiao Hui away from here and leave her alone. However, how could Li Lei refuse to save the woman he loved? He took a few steps closer. Li Feng stretched out his hand to stop him, don't get close to my slave girl. His tone was soft and gloomy, with a hint of smile and a hint of resentment. Want to save her? It's not that easy. I have agreed to be your slave, Li Lei said coldly. Growing up, he had always known what his brother wanted. He wanted his unconditional surrender and worship, and wanted everything from him, including body and soul. But how is that possible? He could never agree with his brother's crazy and cruel values. The two brothers were destined to be different people. However, today, he must bow to his brother. For the woman you love. Li Feng's eyes flashed, looking at his younger brother in front of him, with deeper resentment deep in his eyes. Xiao Lei. He stretched out his hand and raised Li Lei's head, you never surrendered to me, now, for a woman, you actually bow to me? I'm very angry, do you know? I have something to do tonight, so I'll update one chapter first, and then another chapter at 8 o'clock. The last chapter will probably be very late, around 12 o'clock. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 763. Chapter 763 Don't mess with women and children. There were many people sitting in the auction house. However, when Li Feng said these words, the entire venue was silent. The snake-like smooth tone hissed in the dark air. Under the scarlet light, the brocade robe with bright peony flowers on his tall figure looked strange and enchanting. Xiaoling coughed lowly, her voice hoarse like a broken rag doll. Li Lei looked directly at his brother, what do you want? What do I want? Li Feng laughed, your little girlfriend is very naughty. She dares to bid with me. Since she likes that little girl so much. His eyes moved and he looked at the auction items in the cage. When he glanced at the little girl trembled all over and shrank into a corner. Li Feng smiled, then, use her own little boy in exchange. Her own little boy, Li Lei had an ominous premonition in his heart. Let me think about what it's called, Shai, right? Li Feng was still smiling, with a huge expression of joy on the Cobra Fang mask, you can trade a child for an adult. This business is really a good deal for you. No, before Li Lei could say anything, Xiaoling was already struggling to cough. She ignored the vibration in her chest when she spoke and touched the ribs that poked into her lungs. Every syllable she uttered was a sharp pain. She coughed up blood and said, you can't give Shai to him, you can't. A pair of eyes that had lost their luster looked at Li Lei with difficulty. Li Feng seemed to find it very interesting. He looked at her and then at Li Lei, oh, what a great love, but Miss Ye, what you said doesn't count. He asked Li Lei, do you want to use the child? If it's her, the decision is in your hands, Xiao Lei, as long as you nod slightly, this woman will be yours. The devilish temptation. Li Lei understood what he meant. Li Feng wanted to sow discord. If Li Lei really exchanged Xiaoling's beloved child for her, then Xiaoling would hate him for the rest of her life, and even if she was freed, she would never be with him again. Li Feng, this is a plan to draw out the firepower. Li Lei's pupils shrank slightly, the child is not on the ship, so I can't give it to you. He planned to use a delaying strategy, but Li Feng saw it. Li Feng smiled, a charming smile that made the entire stage shine. He said, Xiao Lei, Are you still so naive? You think you can deceive me like this? The child is on the boat. I went backstage this afternoon and saw him, imprisoned in a cage. Gee, he is so pitiful. In the afternoon, Li Feng went backstage to select slaves. He took a liking to Xiaowai in the cage at a glance. The child had a pure and warm temperament, just like what he recalled when his brother was still young. This was the first time he saw a child who looked so much like his younger brother. Li Feng wanted the child on the spot, but the staff refused to let him go. He had no choice but to ask the top management of Paradise. Seeing that they really couldn't stop Li Feng, the top management of G Paradise had to tell him that Mr. Li had sent the child to him, and they were only allowed to be detained and intimidated, not trained or sold. Li Feng was so smart that he quickly guessed the cause and effect. He did not attack the child on the spot, just to stand here and drive a wedge between Xiaoling and Li Lei. Li Lei's heart was filled with turmoil. His brother actually knew about Xiao Xiaowai. It seems that this situation cannot be improved. He braced himself with great vigor and said as if nothing had happened, I don't understand what you are talking about. Li Feng smiled, you don't want a child in exchange? Then just watch this woman die. As he said that, he swung the bone whip with barbs at Xiaoling without any warning. Ah, some guests screamed, the scene was really dangerous and scary. Xiaoling watched the whip fall, trying with all her strength to dodge, but her ribs were broken and her movements were much slower than before. The wind brought by the bone whip was towards her. She could foresee that if this happened when the whip is struck, it may not just be as simple as the flesh being torn apart. At the critical moment, a hand firmly grasped the bone whip. Blood dripped from the tip of the whip, drop by drop, onto the face of Xiaoling who was crouched on the floor. She raised her head and saw Li Lei's hand between her and Li Feng, a black whip covered with barbs wrapped around his palm, and streaks of blood crisscrossing it. Li Lei. Her voice was hoarse and vague. The man's face was stern, with a tall nose and sculpted thin lips looming in the dim light. His eyes did not look at her, but looked at the snake-like sharp wind with warning, don't talk about women and children, what do you think, it's me who wants it from beginning to end, brother. Let's make a bet and play. If you win, I'll do whatever you want. If you lose, I'll take Xiaoling away. Where is the child? Li Feng smiled maliciously. When the staff of G Paradise heard what he said, they had already gone backstage to check the cage. They found that the cage where Xiao Hui was being held was empty and looked very nervous. They took action and sent many staff to blockade the cruise ship and investigate one by one. Li Lei also felt something unusual in the atmosphere. But now, standing on the stage, he could only care about Xiaoling, not the child. The child had been rescued by him and was hidden in the room. He could only pray that the Paradise would not search the room, or that Xiao Xiaowai would be smarter and avoid this disaster. He looked at Li Feng and his voice became colder, stop talking nonsense, do you want to bet or not? Li Feng smiled softly, you can really exchange it with your child. Li Lei punched him. Li Feng was caught off guard and narrowly avoided getting out of the way, but the cobra mask on his face was knocked off by the wind of the fist and fell down, grazing his face. The sharp break scratched his cheek. He touched his cheek with his fingers, picked up a trace of blood, and put it into his mouth. Are you serious? His smile became even more gloomy, and in the flash of lightning, he had already swept towards Li Lei with a speed so fast that it even left an after-image. Li Lei skillfully dodged and fought back. The two brothers were going back and forth on the stage, fighting lively. No one around him dared to step forward to intervene. Just kidding, this is an infighting in the Li family. Who is fool enough to intervene? Only the Paradise side is extremely anxious. If something happens to the two young masters of the Li family here, wouldn't Mr. Li skin them alive? Quick, go find Mr. Li, said a manager. The staff looked confused, are you looking for Mr. Li? Invite Mr. Li here, Fly the helicopter as fast as possible. The management was furious. If something happens to either of his two precious grandsons, we can't afford to pay. Although the paradise is very powerful and is looked down upon by international dignitaries and business tycoons, they are really afraid of a head-on confrontation with dark forces like the Lee family. The best outcome is that both sides will lose. Ji Yuan is doing business well. Who wants to lose both sides for this kind of thing? The helicopter stopped at the fastest speed where Mr. Lee stayed. There is another chapter that will be very late, around 12 o'clock. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 764. Chapter 764 Throwing into the Sea. On the stage, the two brothers were still confronting each other. Li Lei's fists and kicks were tempered in the rain of bullets, fierce and solid, while Li Feng was not a fuel-efficient lamp, his moves were treacherous and deadly. The two brothers were very familiar with each other's strength and character. After fighting for a long time, each had his own success. However, neither one could do anything to the other. Xiaoling lay on the floor, feeling that her eyes were getting darker and darker, her chest hurt, as if it didn't belong to her, and more blood was coughed out from the corners of her lips. She barely managed to keep herself from fainting, watching the fight between the two, and praying in her heart that nothing would happen to Li Lei. If something happens to him, none of the three of them can be saved. She fumbled, took out her mobile phone, and dialed a number. "Brother, come here." After saying this, my coughing became worse and worse, and I could no longer spit out another word. The dim red lights flickered, and on the stage, Li Lei gradually gained the upper hand. Seizing a flaw, Li Lei knocked Li Feng to the ground with one punch. Before he could get up, he pressed on Li Feng and strangled Li Feng's neck with one hand. The two brothers looked at each other, and the air froze at this moment. "Kill me, what, you don't dare." It was Li Feng who laughed first, but when he was thrown to the floor, he seemed like a winner, looking at his brother leisurely. Li Lei looked gloomy, and tightened his grip on his neck, but said nothing. Li Feng had difficulty breathing and said word by word with difficulty, he, Xiaoli, you are always so kind to a woman. You know, if you don't kill me, I will kill you." He was bright red. The corners of his lips were slightly curved, and even though his life was in someone else's hands, he seemed to feel very happy. Li Lei's expression became even more gloomy. "Promise me not to cause trouble to Xiaoling, and I will spare your life." Li Feng laughed. "Do you think I will agree?" Li Lei's fingers gradually tightened, and the man he restrained slowly became speechless. The face with a confused and demonic aura gradually turned blue, and even his eyes became distracted. Li Lei remembered that when he was a child, the relationship between the two brothers was not as tense as it is now. In his first memory, in the garden and sunshine of the headquarters, there was always a thin and lonely little boy watching him from a distance, and sometimes letting caterpillars in. Sometimes, his quilt would secretly stuff a few delicious wild berries into his room, and then pretend to be disdainful. He was very silly at that time, always calling him brother with a stupid smile. Since when did it start to change? Li Lei was stunned, and the face of the lonely little boy at first turned into the resentful look of the man in front of him. He heard Xiaoling's exclamation from far away. The hand that was holding Li Feng's neck was suddenly opened. The world was spinning, his back hurt, and he was thrown hard to the hard ground of the stage. It's not a good habit to lose focus during a fight. The wind's smooth and snake-like tune sounded in my ears with a smile. A cold, pale, and slender hand strangled his throat, just like he had just strangled his brother. "Guess, will I kill?" The last word you hasn't been spoken yet, and the situation has reversed again. Amidst the exclamations of everyone, Xiaoling got the strength from nowhere, stumbled up, and inserted the key used to open the cage of the auction items into the back of Li Feng's neck. Li Feng fell down softly. Li Lei turned over immediately, regained control of the situation, and checked Li Feng's breath. Fortunately, he was still alive. He took off the bone whip in Li Feng's hand and trapped the person very skillfully. Then she looked up at Xiaoling. "Xiaoling, how are you?" "I'm fine." Her voice was too weak and out of tune. The blow she had just exerted all her strength had drained away all the strength she had accumulated, leaving her crumbling. "Go find Xiaowai quickly." Li Lei hugged her. "Hold on, I'll take you back to your room first. The child will be fine." He was about to take her away from the stage when suddenly, an old voice came, "Put down Ye Xingling." Li Lei's footsteps paused, and his face turned ugly. "Grandpa, why is Grandpa here at this critical moment? Nothing good will happen when he comes." Li Lei's body tensed slightly, and his whole body was on guard. There was a murmur below the stage. The guests turned around and saw an old man with white hair and beard wearing a tunic suit and mil-soled Bina shoes walking towards the stage surrounded by his entourage and paradise staff. The old man was in good spirits, but his face was as gloomy as water. As soon as he walked into the auction house, he saw Xiaoling hurt his precious grandson, and now Li Feng fell on the stage uncertain whether he was alive or dead, and Li Lei was actually possessed by a ghost. "Xingqiao, my brother doesn't want it, but this beauty is a disaster." Mr. Li pointed at Li Lei. "Kneel down, you evildoer." Li Lei stood firmly on the spot, holding the injured Xiaoling in his arms without kneeling. "Grandpa," he said very calmly, "let me settle Xiaoling first, find a doctor to treat her injuries, and then I will apologize to you." The old man was so angry that he laughed. "Do you think I will let this woman go? They say beauty brings disaster." Mr. Li felt that he was too polite to Xiaoling in the past, which led to the feud between his two grandsons and brothers. Now, since he had already been humiliated and brought to paradise, he didn't care about humiliating someone one more time. He directly ordered, "You guys, throw that woman into the sea." The few people following Mr. Li immediately stepped forward and surrounded Li Lei. "Second young master, I'm offended." The leader was strong and attacked Li Lei. Several others also cooperated with his attack, with a clear goal, to take Xiaoling away from his arms. Li Lei was holding Xiaoling and had difficulty moving. In addition, he had already had a fierce battle with Li Feng and his physical strength had been exhausted. At the moment, he was unable to fight against the wolf-like tiger soldiers around the old man. He fought and retreated, and soon retreated to the deck. "Grandpa, even now, he still refused to give up Xiaoling in his arms. Do you still remember that amulet? My destiny and Xiaoling's have been linked for a long time. You want to throw her into the sea? Okay, I'll accompany you. Go down with her." Xiaoling looked pale, her ribs were piercing her lungs, and she was numb from pain. There was cold sweat on her forehead, and her vision was a little blurry. Even Li Lei's vow to break the cauldron seemed to come from a very far away place, and it was too humming to hear clearly. The only thing that was certain was that she was protected by this man at the moment. His warm chest and strong heartbeat formed a safe haven for her. No matter where they went, the two of them were one. Her fingers grasped his body tightly. Feeling the dependence of the woman in his arms, Li Lei's eyes became firmer. "Grandpa," he said, "give Xiaoling a way out, and don't do anything you regret. I got home late." This is the third update. Good night. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 765. Chapter 765. You are not allowed to marry another woman. Mr. Li's eyes were cold. "I won't regret it." Li Lei's hands tightly protected Xiaoling, and the sea breeze blew past their bodies. Behind him was the cruise ship guardrail and the sea, and there was no way to retreat. The subordinates of the Li family are advancing step by step. Their purpose is very clear, to force people into a corner and capture them in one fell swoop. Although Lilei was very good at water and was not hurt even if he jumped into the sea, he was holding Xiaoling in his arms. Xiaoling's ribs were broken and she was seriously injured. She would die if she went into the sea. The surrounding circle is getting smaller and smaller, and you can almost reach it with your hand. Xiaoling still held the key that had just stabbed Li Feng firmly in her hand. The key was stained with blood. It was not clear whether it was coughed up by her or Li Feng's. She looked at the people approaching. Their faces had cold colors, and they looked at her like they were looking at a dead thing. A terrible sense of crisis came over her. She knew that if she died here, no law could punish these people, and even the guests and staff who were watching would not seek justice for her. Her only support was Lilei. She raised her head and glanced at Lilei. The man's expression was as cold as ever, and his body was slightly arched, assuming an attack posture. The chilling aura emanating from his body made people frightened. However, even though he was alone, the people around him were still approaching step by step. She suddenly laughed. Mr. Li's face was as dark as water. "Why are you laughing?" Her laughter gave him a vague sense of ominous premonition. Xiaoling ignored him and looked at her man intently and admiringly. "I have been very bad to you over the years." She suddenly said something like this without starting or ending. Lilei seemed to understand what she meant. He still stared at the attackers around him warily, and said softly, "Well, it's very bad. It seems that I won't have a chance to be nice to you in the future." "Lilei, don't talk nonsense, it's bad luck." She smiled even sweeter, knowing in her heart that he didn't want her to die here. "But what if you don't die? She also wants to live. She is still young, a queen, and her reputation is at its peak. She still has Xiaohui, and she still has a lot of good times." However, she was seriously injured, and Lilei had just experienced a fierce battle and was unable to fight anymore. It was too difficult for her to survive in the face of wolf-like enemies who tried to throw her into the sea. Her voice was low due to weakness. "When I die, don't tell Xiao Xiaowai the truth, and don't marry another woman. Fate is unpredictable. Maybe, she can return from nirvana, just like she did when she found Peizian in this life. Find him in the next life. If there is a next life, she must be happy with him." Lilei did not dare to look down at her, for fear that if his attention shifted even slightly, the group of Li family soldiers who looked like wolves and tigers would pounce on her. He said, "You are not allowed to die. When you die, I will marry 10 or 8 wives." As he spoke, his voice became hoarse and his eye circles turned slightly red. She started to cough. Her ribs had been broken for a long time, her body was cold, and she could no longer hold up. "Protect Xiaowai," she said, if. Her voice became increasingly difficult. "Xiaowai, if something happens, I will, no, I won't come back." Blood foam kept pouring out from the corners of her pale lips. Lilei's heart tightened. He suddenly realized one thing, that is, even if the old man and others didn't throw Xiaoling into the sea, with her physique, how long could she sustain such a serious injury? He held her carefully and laid her on the deck with her back against the railing. "Hold on," he told her softly, then stood up straight and coldly faced the group of Li family soldiers in front of him. His eyes were fierce, just like he had when facing enemies on the battlefield countless times, as if he didn't care at all about the people he stared at like enemies, the uncles who had watched him grow up since childhood. "Lilei, you rebelled." The old man was very angry when he realized what he was going to do. Lilei had already walked towards the soldiers, assuming an attack posture. Not far away, the onlookers and the Elysium Paradise became tense, and the Elysium Paradise staff also took action to join the personal camp. Lilei's eyes were cold. He glanced at the people in Paradise, and his voice was as cold as hell. "You also want to be my enemy." The people in Paradise looked at each other and suddenly stepped away in tacit agreement. Although they want to help Mr. Li, they don't want to be enemies with the second young master of the Li family. Who doesn't know that the second young master now controls half of the Li family? In the future, 100 years from now, the entire Li family will fall into his hands. Now that they are retreating, they may be unhappy in the eyes of Mr. Li, but it is just unhappy. If they step forward and hurt the girl, they will be enmity with the second young master. Which one is more important and which one is less important? They soon figured it out. Mr. Li was very angry about Paradise's retreat, but there was nothing he could do about it. He waved his cane and said to the soldiers, "Take down that evil obstacle for me." A group of soldiers swarmed up, some besieged Li Lei, and some tried to bypass Li Lei and planned to sneak attack Xiaoling. With quick eyesight and quick hands, Li Lei dodged an attack coming towards him. He reached out to grab a person who was trying to sneak attack Xiaoling, but without using any force, he threw the person directly into the sea. His skills were extremely good. He had just been forced into a corner and faced off with others for a while, and quickly recovered some of his physical strength. At this time, although it was difficult to fight against many enemies, he was not too far behind. On the contrary, there was another soldier. Accidentally, he kicked him into the sea. Young Master Li is truly worthy of his reputation, there were whispers among the guests. Among them, there were many businessmen and dignitaries who knew nothing about fighting. Although the previous battle between Li Lei and Li Feng was at the top level in the world, in the eyes of laymen, there was nothing brilliant about it. Now, Li Lei was fighting against so many people by himself, which allowed the guests to discover his strength more intuitively. Mr. Li's expression was even grimmer. His grandson knows best. If he is forced into a hurry, the fighting power that breaks out will be quite astonishing, and even the soldiers of the Li family will find it difficult to defeat him. He came in a hurry this time and didn't have enough manpower. If the current trend continues, this unfilial grandson may really throw all his soldiers into the sea and then escape with Xiaoling intact. Mr. Li slowly threw away the dragon bone cane and walked towards the battle group. "Look, Mr. Li is going to join the war." The guests around him became excited again. "Old man," asked other guests, "can he do it?" "Don't underestimate this old man," said the third guest. "When I was young, my reputation as the god of killing was so powerful that I don't know how much blood was stained on my hands. Now that my sword is still young, I have to teach my grandson a lesson myself." Everyone held their breath. They all saw Li Lei's fighting prowess. In this short period of time, several people had been thrown into the sea, and some were lying on the deck with broken hands and feet, losing their fighting power. At this moment, there are not even half of the people who can stand and confront him. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 766. Chapter 766 The Mysterious Man in White. I wonder if the old man can capture him. While everyone was waiting to see, the old man made a lightning-fast move and grabbed Li Lei's shoulder with a palm. Li Lei was covered in wounds, with streaks of blood flowing down his body. He was dealing with a soldier when he suddenly heard the sound of wind beside him. He almost instinctively moved away from the lightning and flint, and avoided it in a dangerous way. Turned around, raised his eyes, and saw Mr. Li. Grandfather and grandson looked at each other. Li Lei moved his lips and was about to say something. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a soldier quietly bypassing him and sneaking up on Xiaoling behind him. Xiaoling's face turned pale, and she had foreseen her fate of being caught by the man and thrown into the sea. Before, the soldiers who were thrown into the sea by Li Lei were thick-skinned and water-based, and could not survive even if they were slightly injured. But she was different. With broken ribs, she would definitely die as soon as she got out of the sea. The soldier rushed toward her ferociously, and she was unable to resist. Just when she was closing her eyes and waiting to die, suddenly, a hand stretched out from the side and pushed the soldier violently, followed by a series of movements. Before she had time to react, the soldier had already fallen into the trap. Out of the sea. After Li Lei dealt with the soldier, he was sweating profusely. So many consecutive fights had exhausted his physical strength. But he still stubbornly stayed by Xiaoling's side. He glanced dangerously at the surrounding opponents, and finally, his eyes fell on the leader. "Mr. Li Grandpa, I know how to fight alone. How can you deal with a junior?" He suppressed the breath in his voice and said coldly. Mr. Li narrowed his eyes. Obviously knowing that this is a way to provoke the generals, this grandson is at the end of his strength. If the rest of them swarm up, they can easily throw Xiaoling into the sea and feed it to the sharks. However, seeing his grandson's shining eyes, the passion in the old man's heart was still aroused. He raised his hand and told the soldiers to retreat. "Okay, I'll fight you alone." Li Lei's pupils tightened, and all the muscles in his body reached the highest level of alert in an instant. He deeply understood what a formidable opponent his grandfather was. All his abilities were taught by his grandfather. Even though his grandfather was old now, he was still not sure when facing him. What's more, I have just experienced a series of fierce battles, and my grandfather is waiting for work. However, he couldn't retreat. Xiaoling was right behind him. That girl entrusted her life into his hands and had no regrets even if she was on the verge of death. Yes, he knew she had no regrets. She said that even if she died, he would not be allowed to take a wife, and hinted that she would come back to him. He understood that if Xiaoling was reborn as a phoenix, she would be willing to continue the relationship with him. But he doesn't want such frustrations. He only wanted to keep her safe and sound for the two of them in this life and for the rest of their lives. His eyes were more focused, staring at Grandpa motionlessly, like a beast ready to attack. The scene was stagnant, with only the sound of the sea breeze blowing everyone's clothes. At the critical moment, suddenly, a helicopter flew from the distant sky and landed on the other end of the deck. Many guests turned around, and suddenly there was a commotion. "Look, that guy. Oh my God, isn't that person, not the Lord of Paradise?" One sentence stirred up 1,000 waves. The Lord of Paradise is almost just a legend. The dragon has never seen its end, but every staff member and guest of Paradise knows him because his portrait is everywhere in Paradise, wearing a suit. The dark gold long leather coat was decorated with chains and locks all over the body. The most eye-catching thing was the open folding fan in his hand, with the 4 characters Lord of Paradise written on it in extremely arrogant cursive. Exactly the same as in the portrait. "Lord of Paradise," countless people exclaimed. Only Li Lei's ancestors and grandson remained motionless during the confrontation, still staring at each other closely. Xiaoling, who was leaning against the deck guard rail, didn't move. She looked up at her man with distracted eyes. She didn't know if she could escape this time. Maybe one glance would be enough. She would try her best to burn his face. Engraved in her heart, she will never forget him even if he is reborn in another life and reaches nirvana again. The Master of Paradise accompanied a man and walked towards the deck. The guests whispered, "Who is that person next to the owner of the Paradise Garden? I have never seen the owner of the garden be so respectful to others. This is so strange. How many times has the arrogant and domineering owner of the garden been so respectful?" No, to say respectful is putting it mildly. The garden owner's attitude towards the young man next to him was simply trembling with fear, as if the young man was some kind of savage beast that could lead to disaster if he wasn't careful at all. The young man who was accompanying him was wearing a white gown and had a light complexion. It seemed that he didn't care about anything. Even the cautious attitude of the garden owner seemed to be natural. "I don't know." Many guests shook their heads at their companions, saying that they had never seen this man before. Occasionally, A low exclamation broke out, "I know. He is." When the people around looked curiously at the guest who blurted out, wanting to know who the young man was, the guest had already covered his mouth consciously. She looked at the young man with a look of fear, lest the man blame her for talking too much. No matter what the guests around asked him, he refused to say even a word. Curiosity was aroused one after another, and everyone became more and more curious about the origin of the young man. The owner of Paradise accompanied the young man to the place where the Lee family's ancestors and grandsons were confronting each other, and said, "You two, please stop." Mr. Lee ignored him and regarded him as just air. Lilay, on the other hand, ignored it at first, but out of the corner of his eye he saw the young man in white. Almost reflexively, Lilay politely retracted his hand and opened his mouth with a guilty conscience, "You're here." Before he finished speaking, Mr. Lee had already taken advantage of the moment he had stopped his hand and suddenly grabbed Xiaoling. Xiaoling didn't even look at the old man. Her eyes fell on the young man who had just arrived, with a look of sadness and joy on his delicate and beautiful face. Mr. Lee's attack is already in front of him. She does not dodge or avoid. However, the old man's hand was grabbed by someone, and the one who took action was the man in white who looked so ordinary and otherworldly. The man's voice was also as light as the ice and snow after the prosperity has faded. "She is not the person you have the right to touch." With a gentle wave of his hand, the old man who just now exuded a sense of danger and oppression took many steps back like a piece of paper. Almost fell to the ground. The subordinates quickly supported him. The old man looked at the man in front of him as if he were facing a formidable enemy. "Who are you?" He was very confident in his own skills. Even if he was older now, he would not be defeated by a strong top player like Lilay. Defeat. However, the man in white in front of him only stretched out and restrained him easily. How terrible! End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 767. Chapter 767, He is the National Preceptor. What shocked the old man even more was the calm temperament of the other party. It's as if everyone in the world is ignored by him, just like a fallen leaf or an ant. He doesn't need to pay attention to it. If it gets in the way, he can just wave it away with his sleeves. Who is it? The man in white didn't look at him. He knelt down and checked Xiaoling's injuries. Lilay hurriedly said to the owner of Paradise, "Arrange the best ward and call the doctor." The second and third ribs of her right chest were broken, which damaged her lungs. She also suffered a secondary injury during the moving process. The Lord of Paradise was looking at the man in white in shock. Such a noble man actually knelt down to check the injury of a girl. Although the girl is a big star, but of all the guests present, who is not rich and powerful? In fact, most people are more important than this girl who was born in the common people, has no family background and no scheming means, and only relies on her good singing to reach the upper-class society. But so many big guys, including the Lord of Paradise himself, could only bow their heads in front of the man in white. Even if they want to kneel down to the man in white, it depends on whether the man in white is willing to accept their kneeling. But, what about Xiaoling? The man in white actually knelt down to check her injuries. The Lord of Paradise instantly realized her importance, completely ignoring Mr. Lee's feelings. He ordered his subordinates, "Why don't you go and do what young Master Lee said?" He had a hunch that if this happened there is something wrong with this ship. Let alone this life, I am afraid that he will not be able to turn around in the next life, or even eternity. The men quickly went to prepare. The man in white brushed away the messy hair from Xiaoling's face and gently wiped the blood on her pale skin. She coughed hard, her body cramping due to the severe pain in her lungs. The man in white said, "Be patient." He reached out and picked her up. At the side, Lilay stopped him. The man in white raised his eyebrows slightly, with a hint of sullenness on his usually calm face. Even the Master of Paradise was frightened and screamed in his heart, "Young Master Li, do you want your life? Do you know who this man in white is? If you want to die, don't drag everyone on the boat with you." Li Lei was also stunned by the sight of the man in white. He cared about the secret of Xiaoling's life experience, swallowed back the brother, and said bravely, "Don't move her, she is very weak and cannot bear the damage caused by moving. Wait for the stretcher." The trace of anger in the man in white's eyes disappeared, and he stood up. Mr. Li looked at this calm face and suddenly remembered that they had met before, many years ago, in the backstage lounge after Xiaoling's concert. This man had gone to find Xiaoling. "It's really haunting." The old man's tone became even more unkind. "Who are you? It's not your turn to interfere in the affairs of my Li family." Cold sweat broke out on the forehead of the Lord of Paradise. He had seen people seeking death, but it was rare to see someone seek death to such an extent as Mr. Li. He winked at the old man repeatedly, hinting him not to offend the other party, but the old man was like gunpowder when he came across his grandson's marriage, and he had no intention of compromising. He stared at the man in white coldly. The voice of the man in white was calm. "My surname is Xia, and outsiders usually call me the Master of the State." "Xia, Master National Preceptor." Mr. Li suspected that he heard wrongly. "What?" Xia Moyan looked at him calmly. The Lord of Paradise on the side said repeatedly, "Mr. Li, this is the National Master of the Xia family, a hidden family." He was about to cry. What is this? Having offended the Imperial Master, everyone suffered a loss. Mr. Li just felt like a bolt from the blue. What? The man in white, as pale as water, was actually the Xiaoquashi he had been looking for many years. No. No. Master Xia, shouldn't he be an old man already? He clearly remembered that he had met Master Xia when he was young. The other person was not much younger than him, and he should have been full of troubles by now. Wrinkle coverage. Xia Moyan said calmly, "My father is old and has passed the throne to me long ago." Mr. Li was completely stunned. Although I don't want to believe it, if I look carefully, I can see that the facial features of the man in white are actually somewhat similar to those of the previous generation of Imperial Masters in my memory. They have the same phoenix eyes, thin lips, and a thrilling beauty in the coldness. Besides, the old man knows very well that in this world, there are only people who don't know the name of Xiaoquashi. Anyone who knows about it, no one dares to pretend to be the national master. That fate cannot be paid off in this lifetime. He took a few steps back, slumped. Looking at the way the Imperial Preceptor showed concern for Xiaoling just now, although he didn't know what the relationship between the two was, he was certain that the Imperial Preceptor valued that girl very much. "And I almost drove that girl to death." He turned pale and thought hard about the remedy. Over there, Xiaoling coughed violently again. Xia Moyan ignored Mr. Li and leaned down to look at his sister. "Xiaoling, are you in pain? Just hold on, be good, the stretcher will be here soon." Xiaoling coughed hoarsely, as if she wanted to cough out her lungs. Her thin body seemed to be shattered by the vibration, which made both Xia Moyan and Li Lei frightened. She finally regained her breath, struggled to hold her brother's hand, and then said a complete sentence, You bastard! Why did you come now?" As she said this, tears oozed out. The Master of Paradise went crazy again, and so did Mr. Li and all the people around him who had heard of the title of Master National Preceptor. They were frightened and thought that this girl was looking for death. Did she not know who the Master National Preceptor was? Who in this world dares to yell so disrespectfully at the Imperial Master? Some guests have turned their heads and couldn't bear to look directly. I'm afraid that in the next second, the National Preceptor will throw her into the sea and feed her to the sharks. However, what surprised them was that instead of blaming Xiaoling, the young Imperial Master showed a trace of rare pity and guilt on his face. "I was late and made you suffer. Xiaoling is still crying, go find Xiao Hui for me." Xiaowei is safe, Xiaomoyan comforted her softly, cautiously. Do you want to see him? Or should I send a helicopter to take him home first? Xiaoling, don't get excited and recover well. Xiaomoyan, who was so groveling, made the onlookers feel horrified. How could he be so kind to that injured girl? What is their relationship? The onlookers felt that a disaster was coming. When the girl's life was threatened, they all stood by and watched. If the master was blamed, none of them would be able to escape. They were so regretful that their intestines were green. If they had known this, they should have spoken up and stood up when Xiaoling was bullied. So what if I offend Mr. Li or even that pervert Li Feng? If you can leave a good impression in front of Master Xia, offending 100 Li family members will be worth the price of admission. 3 updates a day, no more today. Good night everyone. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 768. Chapter 768 Taking off the Mask. The stretcher came soon. The people carrying the stretcher were very frightened and did not dare to raise their heads next to Xiaomoyan. Only Li Lei looked normal. Regardless of his injuries, he and Xiaomoyan put Xiaoling on the stretcher and protected her all the way to the ward. The deck was originally crowded with people, but when they saw the stretcher coming, they all gave way to a passage, and they didn't dare to leave. Unexpectedly, Xiaomoyan stopped. The Lord of Paradise looked at him tremblingly. Master National Preceptor, what's wrong? Take off all the masks, Xiaomoyan said in a cold voice. What? Turbulent waves rolled over the hearts of the onlookers. They came to paradise to enjoy perverted games. They didn't want their identities to be exposed. They were just taking chances and just hoped to have masks to protect themselves. Afterwards, the master of the country didn't know who he was. Don't hold grudge against yourself. However, this beautiful wish was shattered with these words. Master National Master. The master of paradise looked ugly. One of the important reasons why so many guests like to come to paradise for excitement is because they can hide their identities here. Now, their biggest reliance is about to be revealed. How can we behave like these big guys in the future? Xiaomoyan said calmly, it's time for the Paradise organization to be disbanded. This incident made him very angry, but it was his sister's love affair. He couldn't interfere too much. Letting Paradise be disbanded was the most polite thing to do. If he wasn't afraid that the price would be too high and would disrupt his sister's fate, he would have killed everyone on the ship so that they would never be reincarnated. These people should be lucky. The Xia family's teachings to the heirs of the national division have always been to be patient and restrained. Fortunately, Xiaomoyan is not a pervert like Li Feng, otherwise, things would have been out of control long ago. The Lord of Paradise turned pale and kept thinking, it's over, it's over. At this moment, he was extremely regretful. Why did he accept Mr. Li's commission and get such a hot child on the cruise ship? Not only did Li Lei and Xiaoling come to rescue him, he also attracted the Imperial Master. Of anger. When the Imperial Master found him, he knew that the good days were over. Yes, he replied respectfully with cold sweat on his forehead, immediately, Paradise will be disbanded, all members will be expelled, and there will be no such organization in the world from now on. Xia Mo was non-committal, and his cold eyes slowly glanced at the guests who were still wearing masks. The guests all succumbed when they saw such a powerful Lord of Paradise. Unconsciously, many people took off the masks on their faces, revealing the faces of big bosses. If they were placed outside, they could make anyone say anything casually. The world is in turmoil. At this time, they had no intention of looking at each other. They only looked at Xiaomoyan eagerly, praying that this great would let them go. Xiaomoyan's voice was like a breeze blowing across the whole place, those who take off their masks can leave. You don't have to come to our Xia family to pray for help within 3 generations. As he said that, He looked at a man with oily and sweaty hair. The man said, "Johnny, go back and tell your uncle that the appointment in 3 days is cancelled." The man named Johnny stood blankly on the spot, and then he remembered that the uncle in charge of the family had finally asked Master Xia to do something, which was scheduled to be held in 3 days. For this, the whole family had been preparing for a long time. The entire manor had been renovated, and the banquet was held. The ingredients and utensils used are carefully selected, lest they neglect the imperial master. If the uncle knew that the appointment was cancelled, and would not accept help from the family within 3 generations, wouldn't the uncle, no, the entire family hate him to the bone? He is the sinner of the entire family. Master Imperial Master, he knelt down with a plop, "Please, don't cancel." Xiaomoyan ignored him at all. Seeing that this trick was useless, he quickly turned his eyes to the weak Xiaoling on the stretcher. "Miss Ye, you are so beautiful and kind, please help me persuade the Imperial Master." He had already seen that the Imperial Master people attach great importance to this girl. If this girl speaks, the national preceptor will probably listen, right? Unexpectedly, before Xiaoling on the stretcher said anything, Xiaomoyan's voice was already cold and cruel. "For disturbing Xiaoling, the crime will be increased. Johnny, your family will never come to beg the Xia family." Johnny's face was ashen and he collapsed on the ground like a puddle of mud. He didn't dare to beg Xiaomoyan anymore. God knows what will happen when Xiaomoyan's anger accumulates. Maybe next time it won't be as simple as "Do you need to help Johnny's family?" If there is a more serious punishment, no joke. He regretted so much. Why did he appear on this ship at this time? Seeing him accept his fate, several other guests also took off their masks one after another. Although they are also big guys, their level is not high enough. They have never heard of the name of the hidden Xia family, and they did not take Xiaomoyan seriously at first. However, seeing Johnny, who was a member of Congress of a superpower, being so frightened, they couldn't help but realize the seriousness of the problem and quickly took off their masks like everyone else. There are only a few people left, still wearing masks. The guests wearing masks had never heard of the Xia family and were unaware of the seriousness of the matter. They relied on their power and did not take Xiaomoyan seriously. Xiaomoyan lowered his head and looked at Xiaoling tenderly, a little embarrassed. "I don't want to start a killing spree. Killing someone would create karma for his sister and make her fate even more difficult." Among the people wearing masks, someone sneered, "Only you want to kill me? Dreaming." Xiaomoyan seemed not to have heard anything, but still spoke to Xiaoling, "But they refused to save you, and challenged the authority of my Xia family." His slender fingers brushed his sister's cheek, and his voice became softer. "It's okay, someone will share your misfortune, then." He turned around and glanced at Li Lei. Li Lei directed the few soldiers still standing around the old man, "Take off the masks from the faces of those who refuse to take off their masks, and then throw them into the sea." The purpose of taking off the masks was to identify their identities and make it easier for Xia Moyan refuse to accept the requests of these families in the future. While Du Haley treated them the same way they did, they refused to save Xiaoling, so now the entire cruise ship also refused to save them. The vast sea, with no other cruise ships nearby, left them with only a dead end. This is what happens when you offend Phoenix. The soldiers looked at each other and then at Mr. Li. Mr. Li said dejectedly, "Do as the second young master said." He was old, but he was not confused. He had long realized that he had seriously offended Master Xia, and the only way to make things right was through his grandson. Several wolf-like soldiers quickly threw people into the sea. Hearing the screams of those people before going into the sea, the remaining guests on the boat couldn't help but feel lucky. Fortunately, they took off their masks obediently when they saw the opportunity, otherwise they would have ended up like those people in the sea. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Sci-fi Niang. Chapter 769. Chapter 769 Their Love. At this time, the imperial preceptor, who could not be offended, turned a deaf ear to everything that was going on around him. He only watched Xiaoling intently and followed her to the ward on a stretcher. After experiencing the scene just now, no one dared to neglect Xiaoling. All the doctors on the ship were already waiting in the ward to conduct consultations and operate on her immediately. She was anesthetized and fell into darkness under the shadowless lamp. When she woke up again, she was already in a comfortable and soft hospital bed. The curtains were drawn in the spacious and quiet room, and there was a faint natural fragrance of fruits. She stirred and let out a low moan. Beside the hospital bed, a man put down the book in his hand and said in a clear voice, "Are you awake?" Xiaoling saw his appearance clearly. It was Xia Moyan, wearing white clothes, and the faint shadow of the blinds cast on him. She wanted to call her brother, but her throat was so hot that she couldn't make a sound. Xia Moyan poured her a glass of water, raised the bed higher, and fed her a drink. His skills in taking care of patients were not very good. A trace of water seeped out from the corner of her lips and stained the blue and white striped hospital gown. Xiaoling said, "That's enough." He just stopped feeding the water. Little Xiaowai suddenly popped up, "Mom, Mom." She saw him and found that the child whom she cared about was safe, and the big stone that had been weighing on her heart for the past few days fell to the ground. She didn't care that she had just woken up and was still very weak, so she asked Xiaowai, "How are you? Are you injured anywhere? Did those people bully you?" She was really afraid that Xiao Hui would be left with indelible wounds in the gloomy environment of paradise. Hearing this, Xiao Hui was quiet for a moment, and then shook his head slightly. "I'm fine, Mom, don't worry. Those bad guys caught me and only beat me a few times with whips, and then kept me locked up. In the single room, someone would bring me food every day, but no one would pay attention to me at other times. Actually, how can it be as simple as he said? The Master of Paradise wanted to lock him up peacefully. Anyway, the agreement with Mr. Li was only for temporary detention. But then Li Feng got on the boat and went backstage, and fell in love with Xiao Hui at first sight. If he hadn't discovered that Li Lei was also on the boat and had devised a plan, Xiao Hui would have been killed by Li Feng. Even so, the children have suffered a lot. But these words cannot be said in front of mother. He was afraid that she would be worried. Xia Moyan obviously knew this and did not expose it. He only said, "The child will be safe." Xiaoling nodded, "Thank you for coming, brother. If it weren't for Xia Moyan, I'm afraid the whole family of three would have been in trouble this time." When the old man forced her to the corner of the deck, she was really prepared to die. Xia Moyan said calmly, "As a family, what are you thankful for?" As he spoke, a layer of anger appeared on his face. "That broken sycamore tree you are looking for is so incompetent that you want me to intervene in such a small disaster. In fact, this incident was not a small one. Disaster, this is a life and death disaster. Li Lei has done a good job." But Xia Moyan was still unhappy. Originally, the best outcome was that Li Lei protected Xiao Ling through the disaster, and everyone was happy. But he failed to protect her, causing Xiao Ling to call for help in panic. When Xia Moyan received the call, he hesitated whether to take action. He had calculated that there was a 70% chance that they would get through this disaster on their own. Once they got through, the future would be smooth sailing. But there is still a 30% chance of death. Xia Moyan was worried at first, but then he received a call from his sister. The moment he heard his sister's helpless crying voice, the string of reason in Xia Moyan's brain broke. Regardless of the probability, he calmly rushed to the cruise ship as soon as possible. When we got here, we saw that Li Lei still had a high probability of protecting her. However, Xiaomoyan has intervened to make the ending of this matter less than perfect. Xiaomoyan certainly wouldn't think it was him who was troublesome. If he wanted to blame it, it would be because the Zhengpo Wutongmu was too weak, which made neither his sister nor his brother-in-law feel confident. Well, it's all Li Lei's fault. Xiaomoyan felt that her thinking was clear and her logic was reasonable, so she could blame Li Lei with peace of mind. Poor boss Li, he didn't even know what was going on, so he was hated by his brother-in-law again. Xiaoling felt sorry for Li Lei, he has tried his best. Xiaomoyan sneered. Xiao Shaowai lay beside the hospital bed, looking at his uncle and his mother for a while. After fighting in his heart for a long time, he decided to say a fair word for his father. Fortunately, my father went to save me. Otherwise, those bad guys would still be here hit me. As soon as these words came out, Xiaoling felt extremely distressed and took the child into her arms and hugged her. Xiaomoyan felt that they were about to rebel, so he made a quick decision and said, "You two are coming back to Xiao's house with me." What kind of father and what kind of great-grandfather? Are they worthy? Go back to the Xia family. Xiaoling has never gone back before. When she thinks about her real biological parents, she can't help but feel a little excited. Xiaomoyan said, "Yes, let's go back to Xiao's house right now so that the old man will never see his great-grandson, and he won't be able to marry any grandson-in-law. It turns out that this is my brother's purpose." Xiaoling calmed down from the excitement of going home and whispered, "I won't go back." This time Li Lei came to rescue Xiaohui, and in order to protect her, Li Lei did not hesitate to become her slave. Later, when she was in danger, it was he who risked his own life to save her. Xiaoling originally thought that she would not survive, and regretted in her heart that she did not fall in love with him properly when she could love each other. She spent a lot of beautiful years in vain because she was afraid of being hurt. She swore in her heart that if she could go back alive this time, she would never let him go again. She raised her eyes and looked at her brother firmly. It's really the other way around. Xiaomoyan was going crazy, with a hint of displeasure on his plain face. What's so good about that man? Xiaoling touched Xiao Hui's soft short hair. Yes, what is so good about Li Lei? Although he is rich and powerful, he is not the richest and most powerful among all the people she has met. Although he is handsome, there are also good-looking men. How about he having a good temper? It's not like he never hurt her. Why on earth made her so determined? I don't know. Xiaoling shook her head and said softly, "Maybe, it's just because every time I encounter danger, he is the person who comes to my mind and appears next to me." Xiaomoyan was angry. "When you were in danger this time, you called me." Xiaoling said, "That's because he was in danger." She smiled bitterly. "Brother, do you know? I have never asked anyone for help in my 2 lives, only twice, and both times, it was for him." End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 770. Chapter 770. It's not a dream. She was willing to do it for him. Perhaps there is no other man in the world who can make her so willing. This is life. Xiaomoyan finally resisted the urge to cut a piece of broken wood into pieces. There were at least hundreds of killing methods that passed by him. After he silently recited "calm down" several times, he reluctantly resisted. "Live. You really don't want to go back with me?" His tone was a little dangerous. Xiaoling bites the bullet, "No." Xia Mo said, "If something happens again in the future, don't ask me for help." How many people can't find the help from the master of the state master? Originally, as long as she summoned, she was called. How many people are willing to exchange all their glory and wealth for this call? But Xiaoling is actually indifferent. She gritted her teeth and looked at her brother. "Okay. It's not that she doesn't know what she's losing, but she understands in her heart that there are some things that are more precious than this call." That is Lilei, her love. Xiaomoyan was about to be off by her. Okay, very good, I hope you won't regret what you said today. She said quietly, I will not regret it. Xiaomoyan stood up and walked out the door. Little Xiaowei on the side looked frightened. His uncle was really angry. What should he do? But my mother is really amazing. Such an arrogant uncle can be so angry by her. Xiao Xiaowei gave his mother a thumbs up in his heart. He blinked and saw his uncle, who had been walking out the door, coming back, looking at his mother with a bad expression. If you encounter danger in the future, remember to look for me. Xiaoling was startled for a moment, then smiled. Okay, brother. She knew how much her brother loved her, so how could she bear to watch her in danger without caring? Xiaomoyan snorted lightly, and this time, she grabbed Xiao Hui and walked out together. Don't disturb your mother's rest. Her body was still very weak and she needed to take a good rest. Two people, one large and one small, went out. The ward became quiet, and the light fragrance of fruit gradually became clear. Xiaoling was lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling with the pattern of little angels in a daze, silently thinking about what happened in the past few days. She didn't expect to meet Li Feng and Mr. Li here. After experiencing this hostility, how would they meet in the future? She will be with Li Lei and become relatives with those two people. This kind of trouble will remain chaotic if it is not sorted out. I was lost in thought when I suddenly heard a noise outside the window. Who? She asked warily. There was a rustle outside the window, and then a person jumped out. He was a young man with strong physical skills. His limbs were as coordinated and graceful as a beast. His light brown skin seemed to shine like satin in the bright and dark sunlight projected by the blinds. It's so beautiful that you can't take your eyes away. Li Lei, she called softly. Li Lei walked to her bedside, lowered his head, and looked at her carefully. Xiaoling, the doctor said your operation was successful and you can recover as long as you rest well. How are you? Do you feel okay? She nodded and asked him, why did you climb in through the window? Li Lei smiled bitterly, your brother won't let me come in to see you. Xiaoling understood what he said and smiled bitterly along with him. How much does my brother hate Li Lei? She said softly, my brother and I just had a fight and he asked me to leave you. You refused. Although he had already inferred the result from her words, Li Lei was still very nervous. Xiaoling chuckled lightly, I told you that you are not allowed to marry another wife. Huh. So, she said, I will be responsible for you. Li Lei blinked, as if he didn't understand. Suddenly, a big smile bloomed on his face. Xiaoling, he burst into ecstasy, you mean, you want to be my wife? She tilted her head slightly, what do you think? Before he finished speaking, Li Lei hugged her tightly, great, I have a wife, I have a wife. He was so happy that he didn't know what to do, and kissed her twice on the cheek. Her wound was a little painful when he hugged her. However, this slight pain made her feel more alive. It was great to be with this man. Why had she never thought of marrying him before? Holding your son's hand and growing old together, falling in love, means making a lifelong vow. The two hugged each other for a while. Li Lei still felt that he was dreaming, pinch me. Xiaoling pinched him hard. Li Lei cried out in pain, are you really exerting yourself? Xiaoling rolled her eyes at the sky, didn't you ask me to pinch you? I'm willing to marry you, but you still think you're dreaming? Do you want me to pinch you again to wake you up from your sweet dream? Don't. Li Lei didn't dare to let his wife fly away, and kept saying, when we get back, we will go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get the certificate, invite all our relatives and friends, and tell the world that we are getting married. Xiaoling did not nod this time. What should your grandfather, your brother, and my brother do? Their families are opposed to them being together, and Xiaoling doesn't want a wedding that won't be blessed. Li Lei also calmed down, and after a moment, he said, Your brother broke 4 of my brother's ribs, saying he wanted to vent his anger on you. Xiaoling didn't expect that Xia Moyan, who seemed so calm, would be so cruel when he struck out. She said, I'm sorry, my brother loves me too much. She wanted to excuse Xia Moyan, but sooner or later, both parties they will all become in-laws. Xia Moyan's move was too disharmonious. However, after thinking about it for a long time, she couldn't find the words to excuse it. Perhaps, subconsciously, she also thought that her brother played well. On the contrary, Li Lei comforted her, don't I know what kind of person my own brother is? It's time to let him suffer a little, so as not to always be so lawless. But he frowned slightly. What's wrong? Xiaoling asked. Li Lei said, originally, your brother beat my brother and put him in a cage. However, my brother ran away at some point. I don't know where he could go in the vast sea. Speaking of this, Li Lei didn't know what he was feeling. Was he angry that the criminal had escaped? Or are you grateful that your loved ones escaped? After all, Li Feng was in a worrying situation in the hands of the all-powerful national master. Xiaoling asked, what should we do now? I have sent people to find him, Li Lei said. It's time to settle the matter between my brother and me. The 2 brothers have been fighting for half their lives. Originally, it didn't matter that Li Lei was alone, but now there is Xiaoling. And Xiao Shaowai, he will not allow anyone to hurt them, even if that person is his own brother. Li Lei thought clearly, after I find my brother, I will have a good talk with him. If he is still stubborn, then I will lock him up and imprison him for life for the crimes Li Feng has committed. He will be imprisoned for life. It's all considered light. Even if he's shot 100 times, it won't be a pity. However, he is Li Lei's relative, and blood is thicker than water. Li Lei could only imprison him for life. The prerequisite is to catch him successfully. End of this chapter.